You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 23rd of January 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from Zurich, this is The Globalist. I'm Andrew Mueller. Coming up.
Today, I informed the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister of my desire to fulfil my responsibilities and to conclude my role on the 6th of March this year.
Israel's senior soldier tenders his resignation as the ceasefire in Gaza prompts accounting on both sides of the lines. Also ahead, more from our team and other guests at the World Economic Forum in Davos, including a reflection on how new technologies might transform our built environment.
They recover the heat from subways, from tunnels, from underground parkings, which is wasted heat, but they use it to heat buildings.
Later in the show, we'll hear from Austria, potentially the latest European domino to fall to the populist far right. Plus, we'll review the morning papers and more besides. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from Zurich on Monocle Radio. First, a quick look at what else is happening in the news. Western officials estimate that North Korean combat deaths in the Russian region of Kursk have cleared 1,000. More than 30,000 people are now displaced by fighting between rival narco militias in northeastern Colombia, and Thailand's law permitting same-sex marriage comes into effect. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. But now, at the ever-present risk of tempting fate, the ceasefire which began in Gaza at the weekend appears to be holding. In this relative calm, an amount of accounting is occurring of the consequences of the attack launched on Israel by Hamas on October 7th, 2023. The Chief of the General Staff of the Israel Defense Forces, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, has tendered his resignation, taking responsibility for the security failures that allowed Hamas to break out of Gaza. In Gaza, rescue workers from the Civil Defense Agency have begun the grim task of recovering thousands of bodies from beneath the ruins. I'm joined now from Beirut by foreign correspondent Hannah McCarthy and from London by Tahani Mustafa, senior Palestine analyst at the International Crisis Group. Tahani, to you first of all, are we getting a better understanding of the scale of the devastation in Gaza, bearing in mind that obviously independent international press have not yet been allowed in?
Well, I certainly think we're getting more of a comprehensive idea of just the sheer scale of destruction. Previously where we had, limited access for journalists given restrictions on movement, we got more sort of localized visuals, I guess. But now you're sort of seeing the sheer scale of destruction across the strip, and it definitely is far exceeding a lot of previous estimates so far.
And Tahani, staying with you, and it is one of the big questions that has languished unanswered throughout the last 15 months or so of fighting. Do we yet have any idea who is going to be prevailed upon to fix what Israel has broken in Gaza and or govern it subsequently?
No, and that's one of the significant weak points of this recent ceasefire deal, is that there's absolutely no mention of how reconstruction is to take place, who's going to be administering it. That's all been left to phase 3, which is meant to be negotiated at a much later stage. But even if it were to be negotiated, or even if we were to see some process begin, just hearing off of the sort of millions of different day after plans we've got floating around now, those differences are incredibly intractable. Israel has its own vision of who it wants to see administer Gaza and how it wants Gaza to be reconstructed. And that doesn't actually involve reconstruction. It, in fact, involves Gaza living off aid, dependent on aid for everything, while we have pockets of the population clustered into small patches of territory. Meanwhile, the IDF retains full control of Gaza. And in terms of administration, you're not really looking at a serious administrative entity there. You're looking at private security companies being able to distribute things like aid and some sense of law and order. And that's in complete conflict with Israel's own allies, the Europeans, the US, even the Palestinians, who want to see some sort of administrative body that doesn't include Hamas, but it has to include either the Palestinian Authority or some technocratic committee. And how you're going to be able to bridge those differences is really anyone's guess at this point, since both sides are completely adamant on sticking firm to their position.
Hannah, let's bring you in and look at some of these domestic consequences within Israel of the ceasefire. As we were saying at the top of the show, we have heard that the chief of the General Staff of the Israel Defense Forces, Lieutenant General Halevi, is going to resign over those security failures that allowed October 7th to happen. Is it strange that it has taken this long for someone of his rank to fall on their sword, or was the line always that the war had to be won first?
I think you're right in general. The fact that Israel went straight to a war footing after the 7th of October attack meant that there was a sense that some of these leaders needed to stay on. Again, the kind of language we heard from Netanyahu, when there was calls for a commission of inquiry that would involve his conduct, he said, now is not the time. We need to focus on the war. This is a war footing. Well, 15 months later on, and now with a kind of fragile truce in place, there is some kind of reflective moment happening. And again, certainly Halevi's resignation puts pressure on Netanyahu and his government to bear some responsibility for their role in the 7th of October happening, and what is perceived as a widespread military failure in how they responded to that attack, how they monitored it, and how they ultimately came or didn't come to help to the communities along the Gaza border.
And Hannah, staying with you, we have, of course, seen the release of that first small batch of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza, which obviously occasioned great celebrations in Israel, and unsurprisingly so. But have there been any other undercurrents to the sentiment, especially as more hostage releases are anticipated? Is there anger at Netanyahu that this aspect of the crisis has been allowed to drag on for so long?
Well, I think the three hostages that were released in the first part on the first day of this deal were broadly released in good condition, according to the doctors. We don't really know full details about how they were kept. They haven't kind of shared any other details, but they seemed to be in relatively good health compared to what some people might have thought. But of course, some of the hostages who were included in this phase are unlikely to be returning alive. We understand most of them will, but I think when hostages, then the bodies of hostages rather than alive hostages are returned, that's certainly going to be, I think, an emotional moment for the Israeli public, and that's when we might see more anger. Certainly, there's families who lost their loved ones who were held in Gaza, since May, and many of them will be saying if there was a deal agreed in May, their loved ones would be coming home as well.
Tahani, to bring you back in, it would of course be wrong to suggest that a complete peace has settled over the entire region. There appears to have been a stepping up of IDF actions on the West Bank. Is there any concern, or should there be any concern perhaps, that those actions might threaten the ceasefire in Gaza if Hamas take it upon themselves to respond?
Well, I don't really think it's the West Bank that we necessarily have to worry about derailing the ceasefire. There's so many weak points already within the ceasefire. Even within phase one, on the first day, you saw an Israeli sniper kill a 15-year-old boy who was trying to return to his home in Rafah. So, I mean, already you're sort of seeing Israel trying to find leeways. So, anything could really derail this at any moment. And that's just, in the context of Gaza. And again, we've heard statements coming from Israel and its US ally that there is no intention here to really see a permanent cessation of hostilities once those hostages are released. Now, with regards to the West Bank, yes, definitely Israel has shifted, I think, the battleground to the West Bank now. Since the ceasefire announcement, we've seen Israeli search and arrest operations increase quite significantly. Same with settler violence. Israel, as many Palestinian prisoners as it's releasing, it's also arresting in the West Bank. In one day alone, Israel arrested 200 prisoners. And that was, again, after the announcement of the ceasefire. So it definitely looks like, Israel is looking to ignite a different, the battleground, but within the West Bank now.
Hannah, what's your sense of how Israeli public opinion is tracking in terms of whether it would tolerate a return to a full-scale assault on Gaza, which is something Netanyahu has, of course, said is not entirely impossible? Have people embraced the idea that this ceasefire is permanent?
I think the Israeli public remains somewhat divided on that point. I think there is a hard right element of the Israeli public that do support a return to war in Gaza. We've seen that Itamar Ben-Gvir has resigned from Netanyahu's cabinet. He is someone who has described the ceasefire deal as a surrender agreement, that it's a victory for Hamas. And until they are completely annihilated, Israel has not won. And we've seen video footage of Hamas fighters returning to the streets. That clearly has not happened after 15 months of war in Gaza. There's a way of kind of characterizing it. I think the majority of the Israeli public will want a full return of all the hostages. Obviously, we know that some of these hostages are not due to be returned until the second phase of the war, and there are real concerns that second phase will not happen, and that the mostly male soldiers under 50 will not be returned. So I think there's a desire to get to that point and to see all those hostages returned. But at the same time, Netanyahu is facing the breakdown of his coalition, and when his coalition breaks down, he also has corruption charges to face. And again, what he's looking at is the end of around 16 years of his time governing in Israel. So again, a very uncertain time. And for anyone who's followed Netanyahu, he has a remarkable ability to endure political moments that would have crushed any other politician.
Hannah McCarthy in Beirut and Tahani Mustafa, Senior Palestine Analyst at the International Crisis Group. Thank you both for joining us. You're listening to The Globalist. It is 16:11 in Tokyo, that's 8:11 here in Zurich, and a key theme throughout the World Economic Forum this year is how we can reimagine our built environment through breakthrough technologies, from rethinking the materials we use in construction to lowering our carbon footprint. Bertrand Piccard, explorer and founder of the Solar Impulse Foundation, is one of the key players in the world driving these changes. Monocle's Tom Webb sat down with Bertrand before his keynote speech at the House of Switzerland in Davos to find out more about the event he was hosting.
It's a panel about the new solutions to build a sustainable habitat. Because today, buildings are still constructed in very old technologies. They waste a lot of energy. They have inefficient heating and cooling systems. The energy management is done today like it was done 100 years ago. So we have to modernize that. And it's not only for the environment, it's also for the quality of life, it's also for the business. If you save energy, you save money. If you save natural resources, you save money. At the same time, of course, you fight against pollution. So we see that there is a fantastic win-win opportunity between the people who build and the protectors of the environment.
Now, you say it's a win-win and there's an opportunity to make money. For those that have to make huge changes to their infrastructure, how can sustainable energy be profitable to them?
The renewable energy today, thanks to the critical mass, is cheaper than oil, gas or coal. Solar, wind, it's cheaper as a source of electricity. And then if you use it in an efficient way, for example, in the heat pump, instead of normal electric heaters, you also save up to 60 or 80% of energy. Then you insulate the building, you reduce the need of energy, and you save money. So at the end, it's not a cost, it's an investment. It means that you invest money, and you will recover more than what you have invested, which is the definition of investment. So it's wrong to say that it's expensive. It just requires an upfront investment, and this is something that some people don't have available. You have people who don't have the cash or don't have the credibility to have the upfront investment. And this is where we work now with the European Investment Bank, and the Solar Impulse Foundation together in order to have a third player who will pay for the upfront investment and be reimbursed thanks to the energy saving and the cost savings of the client. And this is a way that will unlock the potential of efficiency, unlock the potential of clean technologies, because it will make it available for everyone.
And you say available to everyone. These are new technologies. How accessible are they? And these building materials, how globally accessible are they?
Today, it's available. You know, a company like Holcim, they have a product that is called Aerium. Aerium is a mineral foam that is made on site with the waste coming from the construction site. They used it in Algeria for public buildings. It saves 61% of the energy of the building. It's absolutely fantastic. You have Celsius, which is a heat pump manufacturer. They drill 180 meters down, and they install these heat pumps not just for little private houses in the suburbs. No, they install these heat pumps for skyscrapers in the center of cities. This is something really interesting. You have another company, it's a Swiss company, it's called Enerdrape. They recover the heat from subways, from tunnels, from underground parkings, which is wasted heat, but they use it to heat buildings in the cities. So we see that it's not only big technology, it's common sense. It is a way to be circular with the resources, circular with the economy, circular with the heat, instead of linear. If you are linear, you produce, you use, you throw away, and you waste. If you are circular, you produce something that can be used several times. Like, for example, the energy for the data centers. Instead of putting data centers in the North Pole, where they are cooled by natural air, you can put the data centers very close to a city, and the energy of the data center, once it is used to run the computers, it's heat at the end. You use it a second time to heat the city. It is free energy. It means you divide by 2 the cost of the energy because you use it twice. And this is the type of things where we have to change our mindset. You know, it's not a question of having no solutions available. It's a question of having the mindset to use the solutions that exist today.
Well, let's talk about the solutions that exist today, as well as you mentioned Switzerland. What is Switzerland's role as a country in developing such sustainable technology? And why is it left to Switzerland to be leading the force here?
You need leaders everywhere. Now, Switzerland is maybe a leader because other people didn't take the role of becoming leaders. And when you have a company like Holcim, who is one of the biggest producers of cement, and Holcim is working a lot to decarbonize the production of cement, to decarbonize construction, to bring new materials like the Aerium mineral foam for insulation of buildings. It gives a role to Switzerland, of course, but it's not Switzerland alone that can change all the built environments. We need to have a lot more people, a lot more countries, a lot more companies. And we start to see really good reactions elsewhere also. You have Bouygues. Bouygues is a big construction company. They really want to build sustainable. That's interesting. You have Beckert. Beckert is selling a solution that I like very much. It's called Dramix. It's steel staples that are mixed into the concrete. So you can reduce the iron armatures, you can reduce the use of concrete. So you save money and you protect the environment. All these type of things, and then you put the solutions of energy efficiency of Schneider Electric inside a building. Well, it becomes really sustainable.
Well, we can't have you on the Globalist without talking about aviation, and particularly quite an exciting announcement that you made in 2024 about the round-the-world hydrogen flight. How are plans and preparations for that going?
It's not a dream anymore, it's a real project, because the plane is under construction. We have one of the fuselage ready, parts of the wings ready, the rest is molded in the next months. and we should have all the pieces put in place by the end of this year.
That was Tom Webb in conversation with Bertrand Piccard at the WEF annual meeting in Davos. You're listening to The Globalist live from Zurich, still to come.
Well, the difficult thing will be to find trust in a very controversial personality like Kickl, and to find out whether Kickl also has handshake quality.
You're listening to The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
You're listening to The Globalist live from Zurich with me, Andrew Mueller, and let's continue now with today's newspapers. And joining me from Midori House in London is Vincent McAvenny, journalist and Monocle Radio regular politics commentator. Vincent, we're starting with a story reported in The Times. This is Kaja Kallas, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Policy, encouraging her fellow Europeans to be ready for war with Russia. To be clear, not that she's saying she thinks it would be a good idea, just that it might come up.
No, just very much the message coming out from the EU and NATO is the holiday that we've all been enjoying in the so-called end of history has come to an end. And what she's saying here is, very carefully timed, of course, for the first week of the new Trump administration. This has been a particular, bugbear of Donald Trump right back into his first term, that NATO members, particularly those in Europe, were not doing the minimum 2% requirement of GDP spending on defence. And many of them have been raising that over the past couple of years. Most are now over that line. Some have slid back slightly, but are still over it. Some are still performing under it. And so this is a clear signal that Europe needs to, for those still not pulling their weight, needs to get better at this. I mean, Trump is now demanding that people are getting up to 5%. No NATO member is doing that, not even the US. But 2% is now seen as the floor, not the sort of ceiling. And this is what the EU is trying to say, is that we need to prepare, because if Russia manages to somehow claim a victory in Ukraine, it will change its sights. It might look at other nations, the likes of Estonia or Lithuania, that it might want to try and pull into its sphere once again. Or indeed, as we know, this action that they've been taken looking at Europe's key undersea cable infrastructure. We now have patrols in the Baltic looking at this issue specifically. We had an incident yesterday of a Russian spy patrol vessel seemingly coming too close to the UK and being warned off by the Royal Navy. So this is basically Europe needing to wake up and remember that it is not a safe world.
I mean, Vincent, this has been a recurring motif of Kaja Kallas as well. She is, of course, the former Prime Minister of Estonia, and for obvious reasons, the Baltic states have taken the last few years of Russia's belligerence a lot more seriously than a lot of European countries. Do you get the sense from the way she phrased it, though, that she has any hope that people are now listening with greater urgency since Donald Trump was returned to the White House?
I think they will be. I mean, she says herself, people say I'm a Russia hawk. I think I'm simply realistic about Russia. She's also, in her own family history, she's had parents, grandparents who were in the Soviet Union deported off to Siberia. So she obviously has, strong experience of this. I think, though, what European leaders know is that their entire day and their entire government program can be hijacked when Donald Trump wakes up at about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And it's been interesting this week being back in newsrooms, and we were all sort of, preparing for this moment when Donald Trump wakes up and whatever is going on Fox and Friends seems to then spark a flurry of tweets in which he could sort of blast a fellow allied government. And so they're all wanting to sort of avoid having that. I'd say as well, for the EU, there is a huge opportunity here ceasefire for the UK, because the UK has, along with France, the sort of biggest militaries, and they are nuclear powers. UK is desperate to do a better deal with the European Union. One of the chips that the UK has, of course, is, the huge military force that it has to bolster the European Union, but also the fact that we do have, the likes of BAE Systems, big munitions and weapons manufacturers who've done a lot to support Ukraine. Well, it's pretty lucrative for the UK, and the EU can claim, as well, that they're getting these targets if they do a deal.
Well, on the subject of Donald Trump, we are beginning to learn something via the New York Times about his approach to personnel management in the White House.
Yes, under the headline, White House to old staff, go home, don't call us, we'll call you. This is the sort of expected purge of the so-called deep state that Donald Trump has been warning that he wanted to do. And it talks about an incident on Wednesday morning where staff of the National Security Council, who were sort of assembled from all the different sort of intelligence and military agencies in the United States and seconded into the White House, they had a video call at 11:30 where they were told essentially to stay at home, or if they were in the office, to go home, to wait for further instructions, to stay off your emails. Some of you will be invited to apply for your old positions. Now, this is an important council, of course. Many of these people are sort of experts in their fields. They'll have knowledge of ongoing operations or ongoing situations around the world, but none of them were fired. But it seems that many of them will be vetted and have to sort of prove their absolute loyalty to Donald Trump and America first. So this is an incident which is likely to be repeated right across the United States, especially as well as Donald Trump has signed an executive order, the sort of Schedule F, which gives him far greater power, greatest power a president will have had since the 1880s, in order to fire what should be a political neutral civil service appointee to sort of give a continuity of government. It will give him greater depth in the sort of firing of these people. And we're sort of seeing something as well emerge, and that they're being encouraged. We've seen this crackdown on DEI schemes, these diversity, equality and inclusion schemes. People are being encouraged for the next 10 days to report on colleagues that they don't think will go along with this. So a sort of quite sort of Eastern Germany sort of style report on your colleagues, spy in your own departments, report to the centre.
Very hard to imagine that not going anything other than incredibly brilliantly. Moving along to the UK, Prince Harry is shortly to be in receipt of another large cheque from an errant media organisation.
Yes, that is right, although a lot of it will have to be spent on lawyers. He has done, and as well, it should be mentioned, the former deputy leader of the Labour Party here in the UK, Lord Tom Watson. They have done what 1,300 people were unwilling or unable to do for over the past decade. News group newspapers, those owned by Rupert Murdoch in this country, including The Sun, The Times, The Sunday Times, the now defunct News of the World, have been quietly in and around the capital of London engaged in legal battles with about 1,300 claimants, all of whom have settled out of court. And these are celebrities who allege that their phones were hacked and that private investigators were used and committing illegal acts to obtain information, including medical records and intercepting voicemails. These were also people caught up in terrorist acts like 7/7, people whose children were killed. This is all sort of manner of people who in the 2000s ended up in these newspapers with incredible amounts of detail in their personal lives. Now, the situation legally here in the UK has been difficult because essentially what the news group has been doing is they've been offering huge settlements bigger than a person would ever receive in damages in court. And British law says if you don't accept a settlement before court that is bigger than you've won in damages, you will have to pay not only your legal costs, but the other side's legal costs, which, the legal costs for this whole thing run into over £1 billion, it's thought, for Rupert Murdoch over the past decade. Now, everyone, including Hugh Grant, who, you might think, he's a multi-millionaire movie star. He came out last year after fighting, for over a decade and said, look, I've had to settle because the way that British court system works is I'm going to be landed with a bill that even I can't afford. Prince Harry, though, with obviously huge means, decided to take it all the way to trial. But then there was seemingly panic on day one and this sort of settlement was reached. And crucially for him, he has received admission because News Group UK's line has always been it was bad apple. Some people went to jail, but they were in the News of the World, which is a Sunday paper. But The Sun, which was the sort of market leader for them back in the day, nothing was happening there. But this is the first time there has been a admission, a full and unequivocal apology from News Group to not only Prince Harry and Lord Watson, but also to Princess Diana, acknowledging that there was wrongdoing, that there was private investigators working for them that crossed the line, committed illegal acts, and Prince Harry has scored a pretty mighty victory over them, and also it has prompted this to be looked at again, and questions now being raised as to how the same executives, particularly Rebecca Brooks, who presided over the Sun newspaper's editor, who faced trial and was acquitted by a jury of her peers when it came to the issue of phone hacking at the Sun, but now sits back once again at the top of the News Group newspaper as a very loyal, close lieutenant of Rupert Murdoch, but questions as to how she can maintain that position given this victory by Prince Harry yesterday.
And Vincent, finally and just briefly, a brouhaha brewing at the National Portrait Gallery.
Yeah, well, it seems if you want to exhibit in one of our greatest galleries here in the UK, all you have to do is pay some money into it. This is a scandal over Zoe Law, who has worked as a makeup artist, having an exhibit called Zoe Law's Legends. Now, I'm quite a fan of portraiture. I go to the National Portrait Gallery quite a lot. I had never heard of her when they announced this exhibit. And it turns out that her sort of soon-to-be ex-husband is a hedge fund manager who's donated a huge amount to the £41 million redevelopment of the National Portrait Gallery, and Zoe seems to have used the connections that she had as a makeup artist to just take a load of portraits over the years of celebrities. It is very heavily people in the entertainment space, quite a few reality stars as well. She's dubbed them legends, and she's managed to get an exhibit running for several months in the National Portrait Gallery, which has come under criticism, with many sort of experts saying it's quite mediocre work, it's very pedestrian, but real questions about the efficacy of the fact that she's been able to host this exhibit in the National Gallery, which obviously receives government funding as well to run, just because of seemingly nepotism and a sort of quid pro quo, perhaps.
Vincent McAvenny in our London studios. Thanks for joining us. You're listening to The Globalist live from Zurich. Here is what else we are keeping an eye on today. US President Donald Trump has threatened escalated taxes, tariffs and sanctions on Russia unless it puts a stop to what Trump called, in fairness accurately, its ridiculous war in Ukraine. Trump reiterated his desire to make a deal to end the war, though it remains unclear what and whose terms he would prefer. In Yemen, the Iran-sponsored Houthi rebels have released the crew of Galaxy Leader, a Japan-operated, Bahamas-flagged, Israeli co-owned vehicle carrier ship hijacked by the Houthis in the Red Sea in November 2023, and since moored in Hodeidah and repurposed as a sort of tourist attraction at a reported $1 a visit. The 25 crew hail variously from Ukraine, Bulgaria, Romania, Mexico and the Philippines. The Houthis claim this clemency is in support of the ceasefire in Gaza. And thousands of people are queuing at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Sydney, hoping to catch the rare blooming of the Titan arum plant. The Titan arum, a native of Indonesia, is jovially known as the corpse flower for the fabulous stench it emits upon flowering, which it does rather mercifully for just 24 hours every few years. Its bouquet has been likened variously to wet socks, hot cat food and rotting possum flesh. Thousands more people are sensibly following the spectacle from a safe distance online. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. This is The Globalist live from Zurich on Monocle Radio. Now, as Austria's far-right Eurosceptic Freedom Party edges closer to leading the national government after the breakdown of efforts to form a centrist coalition, what are the broader implications of this rightward shift? There are already firmly rooted nationalist governments just next door in Italy, Hungary and Slovakia. Monocle's Alexei Korolyov in Vienna unpacks what the Freedom Party's rise means for Austria and for Europe.
Ich darf Ihnen heute eine Allianz präsentieren.
Last summer, when the Freedom Party, the FPÖ, joined Patriots for Europe, a new pan-European far-right alliance led by Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, they did so with the confidence of a gambler on a hot streak. Just weeks later, they were celebrating a historic victory in Austria's parliamentary elections. Even so, few could have predicted that they would be so firmly in control so soon.
I would say it means three things. The first thing that it means for the year that was meant to be the year of democracy, which was 2024, is that far-right political promises have an electoral appeal.
Renata Uertz is Professor of Law and Government at Royal Holloway, University of London, and Senior Research Fellow at Central European University's Democracy Institute in Budapest.
The second message, which I think is important, is that coalition politics doesn't seem to be the strength of European democratic forces, and simply uniting against the far right doesn't seem to be sufficient anymore to keep these coalitions together. And the third message is that the calculation of Orban to start a new political family within the European Parliament seems to be bearing fruit.
The FPÖ has been in government twice before, both times as a junior partner to the Conservative People's Party, the ÖVP. And both times there was trouble.
In the past, when two times the FPÖ joined the government with ÖVP, it blew up itself.
Heidi Gluck is a political consultant with close ties to the ÖVP. In the early 2000s, she was a spokeswoman for the former ÖVP leader and Chancellor Wolfgang Schüssel. It was Schüssel who first brought the FPÖ into power, prompting unprecedented EU sanctions. But the main issue, then as now, aside from what the FPÖ stands for, was who was leading it. In Schüssel's time, it was Jörg Haider. Today, it's Herbert Kickl.
Und Festung Österreich, meine Damen und Herren, das ist ein Bild. Ja? Da braucht niemand glauben, dass wir Österreich einmauern wollen oder einzäunen.
In the run-up to the September elections, Kickl said he wanted to create a fortress Austria, where he would be a Volkskanzler, a people's chancellor, a term used by Nazi propaganda to describe Hitler.
Well, the difficult thing for ÖVP from my side will be to find trust in a very controversial personality like Kickl, and to find out whether Kickl also has handshake quality. And I see the biggest challenges when it comes to Europe, because when they build up a strong axis, let's say to Hungary, to Slovakia, perhaps even with Romania or Bulgaria, which could block or delay certain developments or decisions, I think this will be a long way.
And then, of course, there's that dark spectre, the one looming over all of European and indeed global politics, Russia. Back to Professor Renata Uertz for some final thoughts.
Now, when we look at the success of the far right in East Central Europe, this is putting more democratic legitimacy behind the Patriots for Europe, and it's ultimately showcasing Russian influence in European politics. These are parties which are openly very close to President Putin, Prime Minister Orban being very proud of his good working relations with Putin, or indeed Fico's recent visit to Moscow. So I think what we should be mindful of is the direct Russian influence and friendship relationship in East Central Europe.
The FPÖ, unsurprisingly, remains ambivalent about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and firmly against moving away from Russian gas. There's no longer any talk of Exit, Austria leaving the EU, but much like Viktor Orban in Hungary or Robert Fico in Slovakia, the FPÖ continues to challenge core EU principles, common security and free movement. The question now is whether they'll soften their divisive rhetoric if they come to power, or whether they'll push it even further. For Monocle in Vienna, I'm Alexei Korolov.
Thank you, Alexei in Vienna, for that report. I'm Andrew Mueller. You're listening to Monocle Radio. It's 7:38 in London, which makes it 8:38 here in Zurich. And among the conundra being pondered up the hill at Davos this week will be the effect of AI upon our workplaces and on the relationship between customers and businesses. Earlier this month, the World Economic Forum published its annual Future of Jobs report, which identified AI as the most transformative trend. On average, it says here, workers can expect that about 40% of their existing skill set will be transformed or indeed rendered redundant between now and the end of the decade, though I would like at this time to reassure listeners that The Globalist, for the moment at least, is 100% scripted and presented by a real live human. I'm joined now by another such. Seriously, he's right here, I can see him. Markus Schögel, an associate professor at St. Gallen University Institute for Marketing. Markus, first of all, let's start with the big question. Are we all in fact doomed?
No, I don't think we're doomed.
Excellent.
No, I don't think that the doom part is the one that we need to look at. I think there are a lot of opportunities using this new technology, artificial intelligence, or how we call it in some cases, intelligent automation. And especially in the field of marketing, I think we get rid of some jobs that are really annoying, and we get more into jobs that are more interesting. So we don't see them, and this is what the report, I think, shows pretty well. Some tasks will fall away, some jobs will vanish. We don't need to do them anymore. And sometimes these are the boring stuff when you talk about analytical things, when you talk about mechanical things, but we're getting more into a situation where we as humans need to contribute into a relationship where we try to collaborate with the machine for the customers within the companies. And when you look at the applications that AI is producing right now in marketing, then you've got a lot of internal automation, data analytics and all that stuff that is done not anymore by humans. So the second part is that you see a lot of stuff happening at the intersection of chatbots and where humans are getting more used to talk to machines. From my point of view, for myself, I like to talk on a first level support more to a machine that knows what it's telling me than to somebody who's annoyed that I'm complaining about something. So
see, we may be using different chatbots then, because my own experience of them so far, and given that my own level of patience with such things is possibly lower than average, I've ended the interaction none the wiser than I already was, and desperately trying to suppress the temptation to fling my expensive laptop into the garden.
Yeah, well, that's a normal reaction, I think, that we have with some of those chatbots. If they're not applied appropriately, chatbots are very well could be used in existing relationships with customers where you've got a lot of data about them. When you use them in the acquisition phase where you don't know your customer and you're just running down a sales script, the chatbot can't be better than any salesperson, and he will not be better than the salesperson. If you take it more on the relationship, when you go for a bank, when you go for telecommunication services, especially in Switzerland, the first level is pretty nice. It's pretty good working. But the third part, I think, is the one that is striking marketing most from its understanding as a discipline when we talk about media creation, content creation, all that stuff. And funny-wise, the report is saying media and marketing is one of the most challenged jobs. Yes, the content creation that you have for a worldwide communication campaign, like a lot of companies are doing it right now and doing the standard communication worldwide to translate it into 15 different languages, is done just by the machine that keeps you can focus as a marketeer much, much more on what is important, and that's creativity. And then you can make the difference with the idea and let the machine do the math on it. So that's what we are looking for. Some people call it a sandwich way, where you give the machine the idea, it works on it, and then you negotiate with the machine what should be the outcome of it. We see it in search engine marketing already applied, and we see it in many fields that we as marketeers, even in sales, we need to learn to work with the machine for the customer. And this is something that for many marketeers, I think, the hardest part to understand. We did a study with financial services advisors in the private banking part, and they were using AI, generative AI, for asking proper questions, minuting the talk and coming up with certain options for solutions. And what comes out of it is that prompting is not the hard part with the machine. The hard part is, are you aware that you need to be the one that understands the customer better and prompt the proper part to the machine, what you think is important for the user, for your customer? And on the other hand, it's critical thinking. Is the machine right with what it's suggesting? So it's much more about an interaction with the machine, and that's, from my point of view, one of the hugely changing parts.
But how confident can we be that this is actually going to improve the relationship between customers and businesses? Because my own experience so far, and I'm sure that of many of our listeners, is that companies are outsourcing this stuff to AI as a way to avoid dealing with their customers at all.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, there are tools for fools. If you give a fool a fast tool, the only thing that you will get is a faster fool. But what happens is, if you understand the jobs that we need to do in marketing from a holistic perspective, and then you ask yourself what the technological system, the AI system, and the customer or the employee and customer system can do, and how you collaborate on that, then you will find the right solution. Just putting a cheetah in front of a horse wagon, it doesn't work like that. It's not putting just lipstick on something. It changes the way we work. It's more an automation and organizational thing, I think, than anything else. Treat an AI, as I do it, it's my new intern. It's my intern that does jobs for me. And if you treat it like somebody who is part of your team, then you might be getting into the ideas that it's really changing the way that we should be doing marketing in the future, and have more time for creative, for strategic, for empathic jobs that are there to do.
Just finally, and I'm sure there's a very long answer to this question, I'm going to ask you for as short a one as you can manage. How on earth do you prepare your students for what might be about to come down the pipe 10, 20 years from now?
Starting to work with generative AI from the first moment on, use every input that you can get, and start thinking where the machine ends. This is where we need to be.
Markus Schögl, thank you for joining us. That was Markus Schögl, Associate Professor at St. Gallen University Institute for Marketing. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
You're listening to The Globalist live from Zurich on Monocle Radio. Yesterday, US President Donald Trump repeated his threat to hit the European Union with tariffs, pointing at what he identifies as trading imbalances between the bloc and the US. His remarks did not go down well in Davos, where the world's top economists, CEOs and heads of global financial institutions are gathering for the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. For the EU, economic ties with the US are obviously vital, but they have warned that they are ready to respond if tariffs are imposed. Camille Gies is a trade reporter at Politico. Earlier, she stopped by our studio in Davos to speak with Monocle's Carlotta Rebello. Carlotta began by asking Camille how the EU is preparing for the possibility of Trumpian tariffs.
It's basically the big theme this year in Davos. So to whoever you are talking, Trump is on everyone's mind. And so far, the EU has been relatively spared from his tariff threats, except yesterday he sort of reiterated how much he wanted to, impose tariffs on the EU because, the EU doesn't take anything, nor American cars, nor farm produce. So it's very much present on the mind of EU leaders here. And actually, you can even have a sense of that just by looking at the speaking engagement of European politicians. It's like Europe finding the money, debating tariffs, how to project Europe's power, and so on. So it's very present on the mind of everyone. And indeed, the EU has been preparing for quite some time, actually since the Trump 1 administration, it's been really building up this arsenal of trade defense measures. Back then, it was always insisting that it was a deterrent. But by now, you see that the tide has turned and that it's ready to use those tools.
And of course, we are in a new era for Europe because we have a brand new commission in place of 5 years to set the scene. How are you reading Ursula von der Leyen's speech and the way, the commission has been positioning itself as it enters this new era? How are you reading their take on that?
It's a very interesting point because you could see yesterday in Ursula von der Leyen's speech that the EU is shifting gears. Like, basically, it sees that right now, and to quote Ursula von der Leyen, we are facing a harsh geopolitical competition. And so the EU is ready to change, ready to act. And so one of those ways is actually for the EU to reach out to other trading partners. Von der Leyen, yesterday in her speech, stressed how much the EU is now ready to negotiate with everyone, to enter in trade agreements with everyone. And as long as we have a shared interest, we are ready to engage and to do business. So this is quite a shift because it's been something that has been annoying the EU's trading partners so far because, upon pressure from the climate movements in the last mandate, the EU was attaching green and human rights strings to its trade agreements. And basically, it's ready to sort of roll back on that. And it's also ready to deregulate all the measures and so on that the European Commission has created over the last mandate. So this is a shift.
It is an interesting momentum in terms of European Union's trade potential. We have, of course, finally developments on Mercosur. There was a story that you broke a couple of months ago that got reconfirmed about European Union and Malaysia as well on trade talks. So tell me a bit more about that and if this shows indeed that Europe is open for business in a way that is meaningful.
Yeah, exactly. This is, in a way, we can say that Donald Trump forced the EU to revive its trade mojo, right? Because in recent years, the EU was very much struggling to seal those trade deals with other countries. You've mentioned the Mercosur countries. There has been Australia as well when the trade minister, Don Farrell, just simply walked out of the room, which was really lived as a humiliation by the EU. So now, as you say, indeed, the European Union has been sealing just early December a trade deal with Mercosur, which had been under negotiation for 25 years. Now, Mexico, it also sealed negotiation just on the Friday before Trump's inauguration. If that's not a sign, I don't know what it is. Just as Mexico is also the target of 25% tariffs from Trump. And on Monday, indeed, we scooped that the EU and Malaysia were ready to re-enter into trade negotiations after a break from 12 years. Basically, this shows that the EU, upon pressure from Trump, is reviving its trade engine.
Now, I want to turn the focus back to where we are, and there are a couple of sessions and panels still to come that really touch upon this, and we'll have panels by the Trade and Economic Commissioners as well. What are we expecting to get from that?
Yeah, exactly. So today we are going to see Valdis Dombrovskis, so the EU's Economy Commissioner, speaking with the WTO chief Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala about debating tariffs. So it gives an insight into the mood in the room, right? Everyone is sort of freaking out about those tariffs. On the other hand, Maroš Šefčovič, so the EU's trade chief, is going to be attending a panel on how to project Europe's power. So it's basically stressing how much the EU wants to be this big geopolitical player in the field. Whether it is managing, it's too soon to say.
That was Carlotta Rebello with Camille Gies from Politico. Tune into today's edition of The Briefing live from the World Economic Forum in Davos for more from Carlotta. You are listening right now to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. This is The Globalist live from Zurich with me, Andrew Mueller. And finally on today's show, I'm joined by Rebecca Tay, retail expert and brand consultant, to discuss the latest from the world of retail and fashion. Rebecca, let's start with a fashion story which baffles me somewhat. What baffles me is not that the Louvre is doing a dedicated fashion exhibition. It's that the Louvre is doing its first ever dedicated fashion exhibition. This is the Louvre in Paris. What have they been doing?
It's a good question, Andrew. I think when you think about it, they have done other exhibitions that have included fashion, but I think the way that the curator for the decorative arts department puts it, he says, the Louvre is about kind of how people wear fashion. It's not just about the pieces, it's about kind of the inspiration behind the designers. But it does, spin it however you will. I do find it a little bit strange as well, because they do have pieces within the museum that belong to designers, but they've never had a dedicated a fashion-only exhibition.
Well, let's stay with fashion, and there are rumours of a high-profile transfer.
Yes, this has been kind of brewing for months. So Lazaro Hernandez and Proenza from Proenza Schooler, the brand, the New York brand, they've been kind of in the talks since October to be moving or doing some big move, and they've actually now signed a contract with LVMH. So the big rumor is that they're going to be taking the job of Jonathan Anderson, at Loewe. Jonathan Anderson is still at Loewe, so there is no official release saying that he's leaving the brand, but the idea is that Jonathan Anderson will then move to Dior. Again, it's a funny one because Maria Grazia Chiuri is still currently at Dior. So again, waiting for the official press releases to come out. But the idea is that she will then go to another house. The rumor there, I think, is that she will go to Fendi. So that Fendi, there is an open seat at the moment. Kim Jones stepped down from the brand in about October last year. So there's a little bit of a, fashion is always kind of a sort of a musical chairs of sorts, but this is definitely one that has been making a lot of waves recently.
As you say, all unconfirmed, but even within the tradition of that musical chairs that you refer to, how seismic a round of musical chairs would this be?
Yeah, this is pretty huge. I think the Proenza Schooler, it was confirmed because they also stepped back from their own brand. So the brand Proenza Schooler will continue to go on. They won't be showing in New York at Fashion Week next month, but the brand will continue. They founded the brand straight out of fashion school, so it's been going for over 20 years. But to step back from your own brand is seismic, first of all, and then in terms of these big brands, so Dior obviously is a huge name, Loewe another huge name. I think I read a statistic that in terms of kind of media impressions and tags on Instagram and mentions in the media, for example, that Dior is huge. Like it outnumbers Loewe by about 90-1, for example. And yet Loewe is still one of the buzziest brands. So it seems that anything Jonathan Anderson does kind of and touches turns to gold. People are always talking about the latest Loewe campaigns. They're constantly being referenced. So even though Loewe itself is still, it's a big brand, but it's still kind of not as big as Dior or Louis Vuitton, it's still a very, very influential brand. So the fact that these are all the brands that are being discussed in this round of musical chairs is, I think, what makes it so significant.
And we are not far away from Super Bowl weekend. It's only a couple of weeks away. That game has become something of a fashion parade in itself as players compete to arrive in ever more eye-catching designs. A couple of actual fashion players have decided they want in on this as well.
Yes, it's interesting because I think, maybe it's the Taylor Swift effect with her, everyone kind of watching what she's wearing to her boyfriend Travis Kelce's games. But as you say, GQ is pairing up with an American brand, Bodhi. So it's founded by Emily Adams Bodhi Aujla. It's quite a well-known brand in the US. It started out doing menswear and she now does women's wear as well. But they're launching GQ Bowl. So obviously named, to kind of celebrate the Super Bowl. And the GQ Bowl, this event will be happening on Friday the 7th, 2 days before Super Bowl Sunday. It'll be a fashion show. There'll be a party. There'll be all kinds of it's a launch of Bode Recreation, which is her sort of activewear, sort of sportswear inspired line. And it's for men's and women's. And, it's kind of a big fashion fanfare in line with kind of the big football fanfare that will be happening then too.
On a scale of 1 to whatever, how great would everybody's disappointment be if it turns out that Travis Kelce and the Kansas City Chiefs do not return to the Super Bowl and bring Taylor Swift with them? They've got one more game to win.
Yes, I think they will definitely, if they don't go to the Super Bowl, I think there will be a huge set of fans that will not be watching. So obviously all the Swifties out there, anyone who's kind of a fan of fashion, anyone who's basically watching American football to see Taylor Swift. So I think there's a lot riding on the game besides just football.
Rebecca Tay, thank you very much for joining us here on The Globalist. And that is all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers Tom Webb and Hassan Anderson, our researcher Maisie Ringer and our studio manager manager Elliot Greenfield. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. The briefing is live at midday London time. That's 1300 Davos, and that is Carlotta Rebello presenting from the World Economic Forum. And the Globalist will be back again from Zurich at the same time tomorrow. I'm Andrew Mueller. Thank you for tuning in.